and make a difference in his or her school community. The first is Junior Bonet Lima from grade 5, Casimir Pulaski Elementary School. Junior was nominated by Hannah Fraser, Junior's music teacher. Hannah shared, Junior is always willing to help out his classmates and often does so without being asked. This year in music, we are learning the ukulele. One of Junior's classmates missed a few days of school. When that student came back, Junior helped him learn all the chords he missed. Junior continued to check in with his classmate and helped him when he needed it. Congratulations to Junior. I should ask her, is Junior with us tonight online? Give a wave if you are. I can't see all the boxes.
Yeah.
Yes? Congratulations, Junior. Nice job. We appreciate you being here. Our next student is Gia Leventhal, grade 6 from Washington Middle School, nominated by Cluster 7 teachers. They shared, Gia is kind and helpful to both students and staff. She comes to school happy and actively participates in class activities. Gia perseveres through academic challenges. Gia is a proud member of the Washington Middle School community and demonstrates the Washington way every day with a smile. And is Gia with us tonight?
Here.
Congratulations, Gia.
Thank you.
Finally, we have Humza Miyan. Humza Miyan, grade 12 at Platt High School. Humza was nominated by Maureen DePace. Is Humza with us tonight, by the way?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Humza is this year's Key Club president, has been an active member of our school's Key Club for the past 4 years. 4 years ago, Key Club had no members and was not a registered Key Club under Kiwanis. Humza helped Platt High School become an active club, making a difference in our Meriden community. As a distance learner, he attends and leads all meetings, calls local businesses to support our events, and creates marketing material. Humza is a kind soul who understands that community service is the path to making our world a better place. Congratulations, Humza. And congratulations to our students and our families who are all nominated tonight. Nice job. And you'll be getting a t-shirt from our office too that says, you care, we care. Thank you.
For this event, Mr. Humza Miyan. Humza, are you ready to take over?
Yep. Good morning, Dr. Cardona.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. My name is Humza, and today I'll be speaking on behalf of both the Maloney and Platt students here from the Introduction to Public Education classes and Future Teachers and Educators Rising Clubs. We are very happy to have you here today, and we'd like to thank you and your team for making time for us today. We'd also like to thank our teachers and club advisors, Mrs. Guest, Mrs. Royce, and Mr. Arvich for helping us make this happen. We have developed some questions for you, so before we ask the first one, is there anything you'd like to say?
I'd just like to say honored to be here. I know it's going to get asked later what's the best part of the job. This is the best part of the job. It is nice to see Maddie there. I remember Maddie as a first grader at Hanover. The Wall, Anthony Valerie, and so many other students who I recognize. It's always nice to see you all.
So now the first question that I have is, what inspired you to become an educator, and why did you choose to start as an elementary school teacher?
Sure, and I want to just kind of preface all these responses with, please treat this call like you're treating a conversation with a teacher in the hallway that you know. I know it's formal and my title is what it is, but I'm still the same person that I was when I worked in Meriden. So I'll take your questions. Don't hesitate to ask me tough questions. I want you to feel like you have a better understanding of the teaching profession when we're done with this call. So please feel comfortable to ask follow-up questions, ask difficult questions. Okay? Humza, you good with that?
Yeah, I'm definitely good with that.
All right, good. So why did I get into the teaching profession? And to be very honest with you, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to Wilcox Tech High School because back then, I have a lot of cousins, and my eldest cousin, he's about maybe 8 years older than me, went to Wilcox. So, like little ducks, we're Puerto Rican and we're very close family, and
us, we followed, right? We all went into Wilcox, and I had a great experience at Wilcox. But I went into Wilcox to study automotive, and I realized maybe 2 years into that although I liked it, it's probably not something that I was going to do for the rest of my life. So I started thinking, what am I going to do? My father and my brother went into law enforcement. So my father's a police officer, was a police officer, he retired. And then my brother got into law enforcement. So I was thinking, maybe I'll become a cop. And then, like junior year in commissioner, who wrote a beautiful essay about this. She's an Asian female who said, I'm tired of being portrayed as a docile servant in the books. So there's a responsibility there for us educators to assess what we're putting in front of kids. As a Latino male, if what I see in front of me are stereotypes of Latino males doing things that are not necessarily helping our country grow, then I might have a preconceived notion that I'm not able to do that. You follow me? If through my literature, through the selection of authors, through the main characters in books, if I'm a female and I don't see females that are leading the way, then I might have the wrong impression about what my abilities are. There's a concept called windows and mirrors when it comes to curriculum. Curriculum should be a window into other cultures, and it should serve as a mirror so that you can see yourself in it. So that's a really important part of the role of an educator, to introduce to their students materials that are going to engage them not only in the content, the academic content, but also in some self-examination to say, wow, I could do that. When I met Justice Sotomayor, I bought her book, and I saw that she wrote a book where the characters were very diverse. As a reader of that book, you could get the impression that, well, I can do anything, even though my background is different. And I'll close with this comment on that question. I recently spoke to a group of educators in Utah, right? They were like principals that wanted to become superintendents and stuff like that. And they're Latinos, and in many cases, they were the only Latino in their area. So I said, embrace your Latino-ness. Don't shed it in order to succeed. Embrace it. And we're all very diverse. You know, like, I want to challenge the notion that diversity means black or brown. Each one of you has something that you bring to the table that's different than anyone else. Embrace that and let that, share that on your sleeve, like show that in who you are and embrace it. And you'll realize that more people connect with that than you think. So, long answer, I could go on for days on this, but those are some of the thoughts that I have on that.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this is the last question. If you could give future educators one piece of advice, what might it be?
College, I started gravitating toward fine arts and maybe thinking maybe I'll become an art teacher. I had a very influential teacher in high school who made me consider teaching and made me consider the arts. So I went to college thinking, if this doesn't work out, I'll become a police officer. By junior year, instead of going into fine arts, I gravitated toward elementary education. And I really like working with young children. So when I graduated, I started as an elementary school teacher. But originally, I didn't know what I wanted to do. It was automotive, police, and then fine arts, maybe become an artist. But then I thought, well, let me get into public service because I like working with people. And then education really was the thing that called me.
Okay, thanks. The next question that I have is, what has it been like to move up multiple ranks to where you are now, and did you ever imagine being where you are today?
It's amazing. It's kind of surreal. It's like I pinch myself still. Did I imagine it? No, I didn't. 2 years ago, what's today? Maybe 2.5 years ago, I was Meriden as the assistant superintendent. I loved that job because I got to visit all the different schools. I supervised all the principals, and I was happy. I remember having a conversation with Mark, the superintendent, Dr. Benigni, about what his plans are and how that and my plans kind of would work together. I said, my daughter Celine is a freshman. I'll stay in Meriden until she graduates, and then I can go and do something else. Because for me, family is the most important thing, and community, right? So my family is more important to me than any job, including this one. So I figured, well, if I stay in Meriden, I could watch my kids graduate and go, be involved as much as I want to be. And then after they graduate and go out to college, then I'll find another job. Then the governor's office called. And, when the governor asks you, would you consider serving as commissioner, you don't say no, because your ability to influence policy at the state level is quite an honor. So I didn't expect it, but I'll be honest with you, Humza, I would be dishonest with this group if I didn't think my faith has a role to play in that. I'm a faithful person, and my mentality is if God wants something from me, or if this is part of the plan, then I have to accept it and do my very best to serve. But it wasn't something that I was planning for, nor was it something that I applied for. I never applied to be Commissioner of Education. Somebody called me. I never applied to become Secretary of Education. Somebody as Assistant Superintendent, and I noticed that in Meriden, much like many other cities, the rate of suspension and exclusion from school and the rate of academic performance was predictable by race. That bothered me. Being a Latino, seeing many students that look like me doing poorly and almost like normalizing that really bothered me. So we set out to disaggregate data and say, let's look at this. And part of my job as assistant superintendent was to meet with the principals and say, hey, look at your data and what do you think is contributing to this and how can we support you? That turned into engaging students in ways that we hadn't engaged students in the past. So restorative practices came about, where we wanted to empower our students who might have felt marginalized in our schools to have a voice in the process. And that's where student-centered and student dialogue, and Ms. Guest, what is the name of those groups that started about 4 or 5 years ago? Student voice groups. So the goal there was to empower students that represent the diversity of the schools to think about what's working in the schools and what's not working in the schools, and then meet with the principal and say, hey, this is what we think. And then the principal will then take that and turn it into a school improvement plan. So that's an example of how my values haven't changed, but now, I did that in Meriden, and I just started it, and amazing educators like Ms. Guest kind of ran with it and made it better than anything I ever imagined. So that's an example of it. But now at the state level, I could bring that lens to the state, and then at the national level now, I'm thinking about what policies can I implement to challenge what I called earlier that normalization of failure, where across our country, we can pretty much predict how students will do based on where they live or their home circumstance.
Okay, thank you. So the next question I have is, how has your experience on a national level been so far, and how has it changed your perspective on education? And it kind of relates to the last question, but
Yeah, sure. So I spoke to Senator Manchin yesterday. He's from West Virginia. And I spoke to Senator Collins from Maine. And I spoke to Senator Murkowski from Alaska as part of my process to get confirmed. And I spoke to Senator Romney maybe 3 weeks ago. And what I heard from them is that there's a subgroup of students that often doesn't get the attention. So many different things. Focus on the big rocks. Focus on the big rocks. There's a metaphor of what I mean. There's a quick video. When I used to teach at UConn, I used to teach teachers that wanted to become principals. And there was a metaphor video that I used about in your big rocks first. Not if you know kind of what I'm talking about, where you have a jar, you put in the big rocks, then you put in the little rocks, and then you put the sand so you can fit more in. Because if you start with the sand, the little rocks, you'll never fit the big rocks in. Yes or no? Maybe? Well, good. That's research for you to do later. So, if you don't fit your big rocks into the jar of teaching, you're going to hate your job. You're going to want to get out. Start with your big rocks. For me, my big rocks are equity, relationships, and student voice. If my day doesn't consist of something connected to that, then I'm going to lose my passion. Stay connected to your big rocks. Those big rocks shouldn't change if you're a 4th grade teacher at Israel Public School, a principal at Hanover, a assistant superintendent, commissioner, or secretary of education. You know, that's why I lit up when I saw Maddie, Jeremy there, because I remember the relationships that I had with her family. I remember hiring her mother. I remember her and her brother going through, and those are the memories that I have. They're positive memories. So if you don't stay true to your big rocks, you're going to leave the profession.
Okay.
Sorry to put you on blast there, Maddie.
Okay, thank you very much. Once again, we want to thank you for making this time with us. I'm pretty sure we don't have time for another question.
Yes, you do.
We do?
Unless you're class and you have to leave.
Okay, so here, we can do one more question real quick. So, what has been the best part of being an educator for you?
This right here. I have meetings today with people from the White House. I have meetings today with senators, but this is the best part of my day. This is the best part of my day, and you know, I had to reschedule it because when was it scheduled for? Tuesday? What's it? I don't even know. Today's Wednesday. It was scheduled for yesterday. I was in DC yesterday. Buddy called me. So, in my humble opinion, what I'll share with you as future teachers is to treat every day like a job interview. Treat every day like a job interview. Not to impress people, but just know that people are watching you, whether you know it or not. And it happened to be that Governor Lamont's people were watching me, and President Biden's people were watching me. And they liked what they saw, so they reached out to me. So treat every day, every interaction you have, almost like a job interview for the next job.
Thank you. The next question that I have is, how do your goals that you had initially as a new educator compare to the goals you have now as Secretary of Education?
Can you repeat the question? I was distracted a little bit by looking at Cadence and Jocelyn, because I know they're thespians, and I'm looking forward to the show this week.
Yep. So I said, how do the goals you had initially as a new educator compare to the goals you have now as Secretary of Education?
You know, the beautiful thing is that they haven't changed. They haven't changed. You know, I did a piece not too long ago, and I'd be happy to share it with you as guests so that you can share it with the students. When I was in Meriden and I was serving as assistant superintendent, I was asked to write an article about education and getting people into the profession. The titles had something to do with teaching should be an extension of your passion or something like that. So for me, my core values have not changed. And I could be a 4th grade teacher, principal, assistant superintendent, commissioner, or secretary of education. And those values will not change. You know, what I believe in, what I want to do in life will never change. And if a job doesn't fit that, then I will not change those values. So my values have not changed, but my scope of influence has. So as I've evolved as an educator, I have refined my values and my belief system based on conditions that exist in education now. But I haven't changed who I am or what I believe, but other person, as you get older or as you have experience, you start to add to the things that you feel strongly about and make sure that you refine those beliefs so that they can inform policy and practice. I'll give you an example of that really quickly because I'm talking very like 50,000 foot view. When I was in Meriden, I recognized as a principal, I was a principal at Hanover School for 10 years, loved that job. I went out to district office. It made me feel very small. I felt disrespect. I was a high schooler. I felt disrespected. And it was probably done in sarcasm. But right next to that educator, there was a custodian that gave me a compliment. And I remember that moment as if it were yesterday. So relationships matter. And then I'll tell you the flip side of this. I wouldn't be a nominee for Secretary of Education if it weren't for a teacher who believed in me and looked at my artwork as an avenue through which I can talk about what I'm passionate about, which is justice. So when I was a junior or senior at Wilcox, in my art class, I love drawing, I love painting. I did a mural that said, we're all one race, the human race. And even then I had this like social consciousness and this racial consciousness that was an extension of who I was. Now keep in mind, I hung out with my cousins, like I said, we had a big family, a lot of Puerto Ricans, but then a lot of my courses were with people that were totally different than me. And they were from Southington, Cheshire, Wallingford. So back then it was like, headbangers, they listened to rock and they listened to totally different culture. But I was able to interact with both sides and actually by the end bring them together. So going back to my artwork, every race, we're all one race, a human race. My art teacher saw that and said, Miguel, I would love for you to put that up in the cafeteria, make it a bulletin board. There's an article about that in the Record Journal that they did like 20-something years ago. So the relationship that teacher had with me to say, Miguel, think big. Why don't you consider going into teaching? If it weren't for that relationship, I would not be Secretary of Education. So to kind of go back to your question, we're blessed as educators to be able to have a relationship with students. And that is the most important thing. Because you said three things, relationships matter most, high expectations. If I listened to that teacher that made that sarcastic comment, and I ingrained those low expectations that I felt in that comment, I wouldn't be able to be where I am. So for teachers, build relationships, have high expectations, and then I would just say, listen, our schools are not really designed always for students' voice to be at the center of the conversation. You are consumers of what we provide. Yet, where else do the consumers have very little voice for what they value and how that shapes their experience? So that's why I love programs like this, Educators Rising, Student Voice, Restorative Practices, because it attempts to give our students voice in the process of learning. How better do you engage students than giving them voice in the process? And students historically have always had something to say about things that are important. Think about the school shootings and what David Hogg was able to do, create a national movement. Think about immigration, where students have protested and come up with rallies. Students, if we give them the opportunity, they can teach us a lot. So relationships, have high expectations, and listen.
Those are great things. The next question I have is, what are things you would recommend to teachers to do to help their students, be more accepting, regardless of anyone's background?
So I think inherently, and I say this respectfully, I think students are better at that than adults. So sometimes the best thing you can do to lead is get out of the way. I'll give you an example of that. When I felt student voice was something that we should do in Meriden, I brought together a group of teachers that really got it, like Ms. Royce, was on the line as guest. And then I gave some autonomy. Said, how should it work in your place? You know your building better than I do. Similarly, when it comes to issues of tolerance, students learn what adults model. And this country has been divided, and we've modeled intolerance. So the best way to do that is to set up structures where students can have conversations and disagree respectfully. I think it's important also to really look at what we're putting in front of kids and ensuring that, for example, ensuring that our curriculum reflects the beautiful diversity that we have in our schools. So, if I'm a Asian female, and I don't see Asian females depicted in my books, or I see them depicted only as a certain stereotype, that's an example of lowering expectations through the content of the curriculum. I had a young lady who was on the State Board of Education as I served, but need help. And these students are students that live in rural communities. And I know this is true because when the pandemic hit, we had communities in Connecticut that are more rural that didn't have good internet access. So they couldn't access their basic learning. So now, in Alaska, Senator Murkowski told me, Miguel, if a student wants to leave a school and go to another school, you know how you guys, okay, you have some choice, you could go to different middle schools, or let's say you ask for out-of-district placement to Platt or Maloney if you're one school. Well, their next school is 6 hours away. You have to get in an airplane and fly. So that means that if we don't do a better job with the rural schools, making sure that they have high-quality education so all children can succeed, then we're shortchanging those kids. That's been a change that 2 months ago, I didn't even have that on my radar. That's been a big change that I told Senator Manchin yesterday, if I'm confirmed, because you don't want to be cocky, right? If I'm confirmed, that I would want to prioritize getting a better understanding of rural communities, and working with him and others, Republicans and Democrats, to do something for students that live in rural areas. Another thing, Humza, you know this country is divided. I don't have to tell this group. Everything is either very far left or very far right, and sadly, there's not a lot of dialogue between the two. My goal is to take, like Senator Manchin, who's a Democrat, Senator Romney, who's a Republican, and work together so that whatever we do doesn't have Republican or Democrat next to it. It says this is good for kids. But that's something that I also hope to accomplish as Secretary of Education and confirmed.
Thanks. The next question I have is, what are 3 things you think are critically important for all teachers to get right in the classroom?
Man. Relationships.
Okay.
I don't care. You'll never remember a great reading lesson, right? You'll never remember that quadratic equation, like how to solve that. Like that'll never be etched in your heart, right? But you'll remember when a teacher made you feel special. You'll remember when a teacher empowered you to think big. I'm going to give you 2 quick stories, okay? There was an educator that made a comment once, probably sarcastic, that I felt, to this day, I still remember it. I'm 45 years old, I still remember it. Because it made me feel like, and I drove back to Connecticut yesterday, so I wasn't able to do this call, but I wanted to prioritize it before my schedule gets really crazy. So the best part of the job is really connecting with students. I look forward to getting into schools. As you can tell, I'm in a school right now. Maloney was gracious enough to allow me to have an office. So when I'm working in Connecticut, I'm likely going to have an office in a school. And it's my intention to get into schools as much as possible to engage with students. Because if I model it as Secretary of Education, there's no reason why it can't be done at any other level. So the best part of my day is definitely being around.
I knew I recognized those pictures behind you.
I'm in 185A. I'll open up the blinds if you want to pass by and say hi later. I'm only going to be here about till midday. I was just testing out whether or not I can have meetings here without the bells. Because if I'm having like a meeting or like an interview and there's bells in the background, this might not work. But Mark was able to disconnect or Dr. Benini was able to get somebody to disconnect the sound here. So I'm just doing a sound check in here today.
Humza, if I could jump in, because I did have a question and we have just enough time from a student that we didn't get into the list. But it was, what do you think that students, even now today, our beautiful future educators on this call, could be doing to help improve education and the community?
So find your voice. Let me rephrase that. You have your voice. Exercise your voice in a respectful way. I talked to you before, and I'm being very deliberate about saying I want to work with Republicans and Democrats, because right now I see there's a division. Where do you see yourself honing your skills and your strengths? But also, what are your, where's your comfort zone? And how are you going to step out of that every once in a while to grow? So, as future educators, get engaged in the community. Find what your passion is. Empower your school to evolve around those things that you think are important. Find your passion. Get out to the community. Build relationships. Get experiences. Listen to teachers. For me, it was Mrs. Ransom, who was my art teacher. Sit down with those teachers. Pick their brain like you're picking mine. Try to get a better understanding of, what your passion is based on listening to people you respect and admire. That would be my advice. And, you're fortunate. You have this club. You have this culture of future educators. That was one of the goals when I became Commissioner of Education. Like, we need more of this. So I hired Shawana Tucker, and I said, let's expand this. Grow your own program. We can't talk about diversifying the profession if we're not tapping into the students. And I'm glad to see this. So find your passion and start now. You're so. And I drove back to Connecticut yesterday. So I wasn't able to do this call, but I wanted to prioritize it before my schedule gets really crazy. So the best part of the job is really connecting with students. I look forward to getting into schools. As you can tell, I'm in a school right now. Maloney was gracious enough to allow me to have an office. So when I'm working in Connecticut, I'm likely going to have an office in the school. And it's my intention to get into schools as much as possible to engage with students. Because if I model it as Secretary of Education, there's no reason why it can't be done at any other level. So the best part of my day is definitely being around.
I knew I recognized those pictures behind you.
I'm in 185A. I'll open up the blinds if you want to pass by and say hi later. I'm only going to be here about till midday. I was just testing out whether or not I can have meetings here without the bells. Because if I'm having like a meeting or like an interview and there's bells in the background, this might not work. But Mark was able to disconnect or Dr. Benini was able to get somebody to disconnect the sound here. So I'm just doing a sound check in here today.
Humza, if I could jump in, because I did have a question and we have just enough time from a student that we didn't get into the list. But it was, what do you think that students, even now today, our beautiful future educators on this call, could be doing to help improve education and the community?
So find your voice. Let me rephrase that. You have your voice. Exercise your voice in a respectful way. I talked to you before, and I'm being very deliberate about saying I want to work with Republicans and Democrats, because right now I see there's a division. Where do you see yourself honing your skills and your strengths? But also, what are your, where's your comfort zone? And how are you going to step out of that every once in a while to grow? So, as future educators, get engaged in the community. Find what your passion is. Empower your school to evolve around those things that you think are important. Find your passion. Get out to the community. Build relationships. Get experiences. Listen to teachers. For me, it was Mrs. Ransom, who was my art teacher. Sit down with those teachers. Pick their brain like you're picking mine. Try to get a better understanding of, you know, what your passion is based on listening to people you respect and admire. That would be my advice. And, you know, you're fortunate. You have this club. You have this culture of future educators. That was one of the goals when I became Commissioner of Education. Like, we need more of this. So I hired Shawana Tucker, and I said, let's expand this. Grow your own program. We can't talk about diversifying the profession if we're not tapping into the students. And I'm glad to see this. So find your passion and start now. You're